welcome to the Bio360 show. This is the third part of my interview with Elliot Overton, and we talk in oxalates. Hi, Elliot.
Hello, Uncas. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for being here. And we've already dove deep into the topic. And you just mentioned, like, we talked a little bit about, like, all these foods that have a lot of oxalates and to amounts that are actually quite dangerous. So that would lead later to the question of, like, how toxic are they, or what is a toxic amount? But before we go into that, I want to just share a little bit, because everything you mentioned, like all the foods you mentioned, like cinnamon, beets, Swiss chard, spinach, cacao, turmeric, tea, blueberries, blackberries. I have been consuming this because I was sick. I had chronic fatigue, and I wanted to get better. So I wanted to refine my diet. I wanted to, all the time I learned something new about, there's these antioxidants in that kind of fruit, and, or there's bad things, like we have gluten and stuff like that. So I, from my muesli, from my granola, I shifted to eating buckwheat. I sprouted it, and I put cacao on top of it, and I put almond milk in it. So that was like the pinnacle of health. This was just nothing better. And then I was like, at some point I was doing smoothies. So in my smoothies there would go like huge amounts of turmeric. There would be cacao in it. There would be like everything we mentioned. There would be almonds in it, and I would eat almonds like crazy. And for many years, I mean, I'm on this health journey for quite a bit, but for many years, I would like look into the mirror in the morning and I say like, oh my God, I'm really trying to do everything in a really good, I'm very disciplined, I'm doing a lot of effort for my health, yet I'm looking fucking shit, And so now I'm kind of on a, let's call it a very reduced diet. So not getting a lot of this stuff, and I can see the difference. I can feel the difference. So there's a lot of things that actually affecting me negatively, and I think oxalates definitely play a role in it. It's hard to tell it apart, because there's in many foods we have several anti-nutrients, that might affecting us. So and maybe you can talk about this, like the toxic amounts, like, because there's a deadly dose to it, right? Deathly.
Yeah. First of all, I just want to say, I'm sorry that you had to go through that, Uncas. It seems to be just a recurring theme, right? It's a recurring theme. It was the same for myself as well. You're following all of what you think is meant to be the healthiest way of eating, and you put all of your resources into it. And it's the same. I mean, I studied nutrition, and I was aiming to get 10 cups of green leafy vegetables, spinach, and all of this stuff in every single day, right? And it did not provide the results. Thankfully, touch wood, I didn't get really sick, but I work with a lot of people, and it's a recurring kind of story. People, the more plant foods they eat, the more oxalates they eat, the worse they actually become. So it seems to be just this recurring theme that is so common now, so common, especially. And so it's really important that, you're getting the word out there, because people need to know about this stuff. Now, on the toxic dose of oxalate is toxic. Oxalic acid is an established toxin. I think it was the first ever proper toxin studied in toxicology studies. And I think the acute toxic dose is, if I remember correctly, I think it's like 4 or 5 grams. Okay, so an individual can actually develop acute renal failure from consuming 4 to 5 grams of this in one go, right? Now, there have been cases of individuals, like I said, eating too much rhubarb, or particularly women in Britain who were having sorrel soup. So wood sorrel is, I think it's a type of tree or plant, and the leaves of that you can make into a soup. Now, there was several cases of individuals who consumed too much of this and actually died like there and then within a couple of hours. So it is a very real thing. This was once acknowledged, but not so much these days. Now, so I think it's not exact, but if I remember correctly, the acute toxic dose is between 4 and 5 grams. Now, let's put it this way. On a high oxalate diet, particularly, say, a vegan diet or ketogenic diet, which includes, like, the things you said, you're having your buckwheat in the morning sprouted with almond milk with, all of these other kinds of high oxalate foods, you can easily top 1.2 grams per day, easily. If you're having a smoothie, you can easily get that. Now, there have been cases, there is some degree of individual variability here, and this is what we need to factor in, is that whilst the established toxicity dose is 4 to 5 grams or whatever it is, maybe a little bit higher than that, there are people who have experienced very similar symptoms by consuming a lot less. Okay, so these kind of established, elevated levels of toxicity, they're not exact. People are different. Our biochemistry is all different. And so some people are extremely sensitive to much lower doses. There was a recent case study published in one of the journals. I've forgotten which journal it is. It was about an individual who had, I think it was a couple of green smoothies per day or juices, and they were admitted to the emergency room with acute renal failure. So they gave themselves kidney failure, and they were in the ICU for a good couple of weeks after that because they would have died. So there are people who are juicing or having these juices and actually causing real, like, they are overloading themselves to the point where they could kill themselves. So this is a very real thing, and this is completely within the dietary modalities that are commonly promoted as health promoting today, right? So, you kind of take this idea of juicing and you take it to the next level. So you do 4 or 5 juices a day. You could easily be getting 4 grams. You could get enough to kill yourself in one day. Now, I've had people get in contact. You see, I work with people from all around the world, right? Particularly people seek me out for certain things. One of those is to help them with potentially oxalate problems, but it's also to help with some of the B vitamins and things that might be related to that. And now I've had so many individuals who have come to me. I mean, I had this one individual who said that she had a green smoothie, and I think it probably, from what she said, it must have been around 800 to 900 milligrams. Generally, the majority of people, they can do this for a long period of time and only start to accumulate these toxins and see symptoms over a long period of time. But actually, some people have an immediate response, and they may not have acute kidney failure, but they can have symptoms which are completely debilitating. So this one individual, she had the green smoothie and she thought she was having some kind of an allergic reaction. What I suspect was that it was actually acute oxalate poisoning. She developed all kind of neurological injury, brain fog. She was hospitalized, not with kidney failure, but actually with a kind of strange neurological condition. Her naturopathic doctors did not believe it was due to the smoothie, but after looking at my videos, looking at the work of Sally Norton, Susan Owens, she actually came to the conclusion, and I agreed with her, that she caused herself an acute oxalate poisoning episode, and she's going to have to deal with that probably for the rest of her life. Okay, it is that severe. At least she's going to be working on this stuff for the next 5 or 10 years. And so this is really key, important information. People need to understand that just because something grows out in the world, just because you find it in the supermarket, it can cause lots of harm. It can cause severe harm. Plants are fundamentally toxic in many ways. Many of the beneficial responses that we get from them, I think, apply to a healthy individual. Many of these hormetic responses, like I'm sure Paul Saladino spoke to you about extensively, is that when the body is already under a lot of stress, when gut issues are present, when there may be a complicated health history, having a high oxalate diet is like throwing pouring oil onto a fire. Yeah. Right? It's really that bad. So it's a dangerous thing that we're playing with, that we're talking about, Uncas.
Yeah, and at the same time, that might prevent sick people from getting better. And I just found a photo the other day. Like I've been 17, 18? No, I think January 18. I've been working the Olympic Games in Korea. And I have two pictures from one day, and then the next day. And as I said, like with the winter squash, I look like like a frog or something like this, Like the difference couldn't be more. And the only thing I did, I indulged in nuts. I bought like 4 kilos of different nuts they had there in the supermarket, and a couple of like I forgot the name, like a nut it's hard to get here, and which is touted to be the most superfood, whatever. So I just like had a lot, I mean, I gotta say that about myself. I overdo everything, So having a few almonds, like a small handful or something, would probably not cause any issues with me. But I don't eat like 10 nuts, I eat like 200. At least. So, and then I would get sicker, and then I would like, now I'm getting sicker. I got to do more green smoothies. I got to eat more nuts, step even more away from the bad stuff, and put more turmeric and drink more green tea and go out and indulge on the blackberries and the blueberries and everything, and buy the expensive blueberries and everything. So this is like, it just leads you, desperate people try to mitigate their symptoms, and they might just look into the wrong direction and just make things worse and worse and worse, and actually getting into a very dangerous zone.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better myself. I think that is exactly what happens. And really, I'm sure you probably know, like you said yourself, and I find this working with people who have the initiative and the motivation to actually kind of go against conventional recommendations in terms of medicine, look at nutritional information, look at alternative health, and try to improve their own health conditions. What I see is kind of a similar kind of personality type. I think many of us are like it. People who are interested in health, who are interested in improving their health, they jump in head first into everything. And it's like oftentimes you see people don't just put in 100%, they put in 500%, and they do everything right, like excessively almost. And so with this kind of individual who is consuming these oxalate foods in very high amounts because they think it's healthy, like you said in your situation, it without a doubt does make them worse. So this is a very common story that you hear going through someone's history, because that's what I do when I work with people. I like to go through all of their history and find out what led to what exactly when. And oftentimes what you see is that when they started doing the green juices, when they started consuming many of these superfoods, things got worse very quickly. Things go downhill almost immediately. And it may not be an immediate reaction in the body, but things generally tend to go downhill. They may get some more diagnosis. Their gut issues may gradually get worse. They may get more joint pain, more brain fog. Their autoimmunity might get worse. And it gets worse and worse and worse until they reach rock bottom. And in some people, that's being bedbound. Right, being bedbound before they can break free of the dogma of these kind of superfoods, vegan ideology, whatever it is, and actually start. And that's when they find either my work or Susan's work or Sally's work, and things click. They click because there are so many people who are in the same position who resonate with exactly what you just said.
Maybe you can touch on celery juice a little bit. So celery is, from my understanding, also quite high in oxalates, and this is pushed by somebody who's called Anthony William, the medical medium, bestseller author of many, many books, and he's pushing this thing. I mean, he's pushing a lot of things, but one of his big things is the celery juice, so you have to drink that as much as you can all day long. So this is basically, in my understanding, an oxalate drink. What do you think about that?
It is without doubt an oxalate drink. You have to think, if you're eating celery now, while celery isn't one of the extremely high foods, I mean, it still contains some oxalate, right? And you think if you eat celery, if you eat any whole food really, is that you're getting a lot of the water and the fiber. So you can only eat so many sticks of celery, before your stomach gets bloated and you feel like you don't want any more. So your innate kind of the way that your body works is so that you don't overeat things like that, like things like fruit, things high in water content. You can't overeat it. Now, that's not to say that it might not cause you a problem if you eat a bunch of it, but generally by eating something as a whole, it's you've kind of got a bit of a defense against it with your appetite. Problem is when you juice something, even if it's not extremely high. Now, celery, it is relatively high. It's not one of the highest, but it contains oxalates. When you juice it, what you are doing is you are fundamentally bypassing your own defense mechanisms to prevent you from eating too much of it, right? Yeah. You're getting all of the oxalate out of it. You're concentrating it and you're making it into a juice. So theoretically, you could juice 2 heads of celery and put it in a pint glass, right?
Sure. I mean, you could probably eat like 2 sticks or maybe 3 or something like that, realistically. But for like 1 glass, I've just looked up a video prior to our conversation from Anthony Williams. So what he recommends, like the amount he wants, like people to have like half a liter, so that's like 1 portion, like 16 ounces, I think. And so you take the entire, I don't know how you call it, the entire thing, like all the sticks and juice that, so nobody could ever eat that, and if you want to do it even better, you would do a second one and drink it all day long.
Yeah. So that is going to be very heavy in oxalate, right? So now this is where it gets confusing. I mean, I will agree that I fundamentally disagree with Anthony Williams. Is that his name? The medical medium guy? Yeah. I fundamentally, I disagree with that notion. I think it's dangerous personally. That's because I've had several people who've tried to do his juice celery thing. It made him a lot worse. However, it's confusing because there are some individuals who claim that it helps them. Oh, yeah. So there's a guy called Dave Mayo. He runs a website called Hack Your Gut. So he kind of thinks very much outside the box of things. And so he was trying to make sense as to why this might happen. Now, there are certain compounds in celery juice which may help the gut lining kind of regenerate or may help a leaky gut. Okay, so I don't discount that there may be some kind of chemical which is providing some benefit in some people. But there's loads of other ways that you can do that without potentially risking the vast amount of oxalates. I mean, I don't think that I don't agree with the idea of juicing. Like standard, I don't think anyone should juice anything because you don't find that stuff in nature, and that you can easily overconsume something. Like in terms of plant toxins, you can overconsume it by juicing it. Whereas if you were to eat it, as you said, you can only eat 3 or 4 sticks at a maximum. I mean, celery is horrible. Who would want to eat 4 sticks of celery? You need bunch of hummus or like liver pate or something just to get it down, right? It's repulsive. So realistically, like if you're going to be juicing anything, I think that is problematic anyway. That's not to say that there might not be some small mechanism by which it helps some people, but I have heard some horror stories with it. And there's a bunch of people who say that it helped temporarily, but then actually they got a lot worse. Yeah. So I would say
also the inclusion of things, like you said that in the beginning, like healthy user bias, people starting on that thing, they having the celery juice, but they're going to be out more in the sun. They're going to exercise more. They're having a walk, they just take care of themselves. That's why they actually do it. So that might be confounding factors, but then on that kind of low nutrient dense, I'm sure like Anthony William will not agree. Low nutrient dense diet, long term, people will get into trouble, I think. Anthony Williams, I just looked it up. What he actually says about the oxalates, and I just want to quote him. He says in his own website, okay, medical research and science has not discovered that there are anti-oxalates in fruits, vegetables, and leafy grains that prevent the oxalates from causing us damage. The current trend tells us they do.
I mean, right, this guy gets his information from like channeling angels, right?
Yeah.
Was he channel angels or something? Right, okay. So I'm not here to dispute that or whether that's true or not. What I do know is that research does know that there are antioxalate factors, and that is minerals. That's calcium, right? So calcium is an antioxalate factor to stop you from absorbing it. That's not to say that it's not going to cause you problems. I mean, until he's got some like fairly thorough research to back up his claims, then I mean, I'm going to pass that off as complete BS personally, because I've worked with hundreds of people who've been severely damaged by this stuff. So, I mean, you know,
I think he's just trying to protect himself, you know. He probably didn't. He probably didn't know. I mean, if he's actually, I'm sorry, I mean, this is just pure speculation. But if he's actually getting his information from the spirit, as he claims, or he has like a huge team, because he's actually kind of writing books, and there's a lot of good stuff in it, I heard. But it helps people, you know. So there must be like, he must have a team that actually gives him a lot of information. And they came up with this celery thing, you know. I mean, you always have to have something unique, you know, don't you? And but they didn't know about that. And now the critics come up and say like, oh yeah, actually there's something that only I know, you know, of. No, so that's protective argument. Nobody can say something against it because we don't know. We don't have communication to spirit.
Yeah, it's damage control, isn't it? You know, it's I would agree with that. I mean, again, like if he can back up his claim, then by all means, you know, I try not to be dogmatic about this stuff, and I try to look at it. But if there were antioxalate factors in certain vegetables aside from the minerals, then why do so many people get sick from eating too many of them, right? And I've had, as I said, you know, I've had several people who went through his protocol, actually got a lot worse before they knew about oxalates. So I'm calling BS on that one.
Okay. So can we talk about, I asked you before, I'm not sure if you have really answered that, like can we detox it in the liver and then kind of transition into oxalate dumping?
Right, okay. So are you talking about specifically the stuff that is produced by the body, or are you talking about what's coming in through the diet?
What's coming through the diet? I mean, the body can, I mean, we have heavy metals, we have so many toxins, and we have a ton of detox capacities, you know. I mean, they're clearly overloaded these days, but our body can deal with foreign things. How is that with oxalates?
Right, okay. So if you look at something like metal, for instance, arsenic is going to be dealt with through, right, to keep it simple, the liver has several different what we call pathways. Now you have phase 1 pathways, and then you have phase 2 pathways. We'll talk specifically about phase 2 pathways. So in the liver, you have various chemicals that your body can produce, or amino acids that you can derive from the diet, which what you do, you conjugate them with a toxin, or you bind them with a toxin. When you bind them with a toxin, you carry it out through the bile, and it goes either throughout the kidneys or through the gut. That's how you detoxify things. So these pathways called conjugation pathways, where you're binding things and carrying them out. That is detoxification. That is the definition of detoxification. You're using sulfur, you're using glutathione, you're using methylation, you're using acetylation, glucuronidation, all of these different pathways, glycination, okay? There's a bunch. None of those apply to oxalate, okay? You do not have an innate capacity to detoxify oxalate. You do not conjugate it to make it a safe compound. You see, when you have a metal, or when you have some kind of a chemical which you are getting rid of, you activate it, so you make it a little bit more dangerous, but then you conjugate it. Once it's conjugated, it's safe. It's not going to cause problems. You just get rid of it. When it's bound to a glutathione, for instance, or it's bound to sulfate, it's no longer a problem. As long as you can get it out, that's fine. That doesn't occur with oxalate. You do not bind anything with oxalate. No, oxalate remains in its whole form. It remains as a oxalate salt. So whether that's potassium oxalate,
because it's already bound. You know, you said you have the oxalic acid, so it binds to calcium or other minerals, and then we have a compound that can't be broken into anything else, right?
Basically, yeah, that's exactly what it is. So you can have the oxalic acid portion move from different mineral ions, right? So if it's with potassium, it can go to magnesium, and then it can go to calcium. but it can't. You're not conjugating it with any inherent detoxification molecule that you would usually do with some kind of toxin or chemical. And so what this means is that as it's on its way out of the body, your body will try and get rid of it. And it does this primarily through various routes, primarily either through the kidneys or through the gut. Okay, so it can do this via several different mechanisms. But on its way out, it is not protected, let's say. It can cause damage on its way out. It can cause damage to the vascular system. It causes damage to the kidneys, damage to the urinary tract, damage to the gut, damage to the anus, for God's sake. I mean, if you look at, right, let's talk about this, right? You're getting rid of oxalate. Say if you've got a bunch of oxalate in the gut, the oxalate is so kind of corrosive or so kind of irritant to the soft tissues of the anus, it can cause things like anal bleeding, anal itching, anal, kind of like what they call, like, not fistulas, but sorry, I've forgotten the term, but essentially you can get ulcerations throughout the lower colon and actually throughout the anus because it's causing damage. Likewise, as I said before, you can get burning in the urinary tract. You can get blood, microscopic blood, proteinuria. You can get damage to the bladder, damage to the kidneys, damage to the vascular system, damage to the nerves. As long as it's moving around the body, if it's coming into contact with tissues, it can cause damage to them. So if you've got that consistently, a short period of time of that is not necessarily a problem because you can just repair. But when you've got that on a consistent basis, every single day, all day, because what you're doing is you're consuming a bunch of oxalate foods, then that is going to cause problems long term. That makes sense?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So how do we get? Let's assume, like, let's just take me. I've been over consuming oxalates for a couple of years. I don't think they're doing too much harm to me, but also at the same time, I don't know. But now I kind of stop consuming them. What's going to happen?
Right. Okay. So it's important just to flesh out the kind of process. What happens when you eat a high oxalate food? We spoke about how it's absorbed through the intestine. You can have absorption throughout kind of many of the kind of soft tissues in the stomach. A lot of it's absorbed in the stomach. Essentially, right, if you think of your blood as kind of a reservoir, there's a reservoir for minerals, but it's also a reservoir for oxalate, right? So what's happening is when you have oxalate absorption, and it can also be absorbed by the lungs, by the way, but that's a whole other story. When you get oxalate absorption, what it is doing is it's absorbed into the blood in a soluble form. So that's, say, potassium oxalate, let's say. What that is doing is it's propping up the blood oxalate level. So you think of your blood having various levels of different nutrients, and that's what you will do if you go for a standard blood test. Standard blood panel will measure the types of white blood cells. It will measure, if you get the electrolytes, it will measure potassium, calcium, sodium, chloride, okay? Well, likewise, oxalate is an ion, it's a charged particle. So essentially what's happening is you have a level of oxalate, and that can fluctuate. That can go up, that can go down. And that correlates with what you have eaten. So if you eat a high oxalate meal, then within a couple of hours, your oxalate level in the blood will pump right up, okay?
How can we measure oxalates?
It's very difficult to measure. It's very difficult to measure because we'll talk about this in a minute because we have to speak about dumping and the processes that occur there. Mm-hmm. A lot of what we know, again, is from the genetic research on primary hyperoxaluria. But essentially, what's happening is when your blood level of oxalate is pumped up, you're going to get it traveling around the body. Again, it may be precipitating as calcium oxalate in certain tissues. It particularly, it is actually mostly it's often precipitated in places where there is past injury or where there is current injury. So because if you have an inflammatory process, say in a joint, you're going to get elevated blood flow to that area. Or for instance, if you have inflammatory process in any other part of the body, you get increased rate of blood flow through that area. And therefore, if your blood is high in oxalate and your blood is also high in calcium, you can actually get precipitation of calcium oxalate in that tissue. But right, let's say this goes on for a long time. You store a bunch of oxalate. You get rid of what you can through the kidneys. Right, here comes down to your question. So you say if someone's been consuming it for a long time, what happens? Well, if you, like yourself, has stopped consuming it, you've lowered your oxalate intake, right?
Yep, from the occasional moments where I eat some chocolate, yeah.
Right, okay. Well, if you're going to pig out on oxalates, it has to be on chocolate, right? I can understand that one, trust me.
Do you eat chocolate?
I do on occasion, very occasion. I don't think that I particularly have an issue so much with oxalates. Not to say that it's, if I was eating a bunch, then it wouldn't be a problem. But yeah, I do on occasion, not very often though. Right, so back to the question, right? So you said if someone eats a high oxalate diet, they accumulate a lot in their body and then they reduce that, right? So what happens when you reduce oxalate in the diet? What happens is your blood level of oxalate goes down because it's not coming in through the gut, right? So when you have less coming in from the gut, the drop of oxalate in the tissue, and this hasn't been very well characterized, the mechanism, but it definitely does occur, is the drop in the blood level of oxalate is going to signal. You see, tissues have sensing mechanisms. They sense the various, I think it's maybe through electromagnetic frequencies or whatever is going on, maybe through light, maybe through some other kind of mechanism. What's happening is they are sensing the degree or the level of minerals, the level of ions, the level of nutrients in the blood. So there is an oxalate sensing mechanism to tell you, okay, when the tissues see that there is low oxalate in the blood, remember that oxalate is a toxin. Oxalate can activate the immune system. Oxalate can, when it's in too high amounts, it can cause acute kidney failure. So your cells need to know, or your tissues need to know how much there is in the blood at any one given time. And the reason is when your blood level drops, then your tissues basically say, now we can get rid of this stressor. Now we can get rid of this toxin. So when the level drops, your tissues start to release oxalate into the blood at a manageable level, okay? As you go from a period of having lots coming in through the gut, that decreases. When it's coming in through the gut, your tissues can't release oxalate at the rate that they would like to, because then you would overload oxalate in the blood. You could potentially cause kidney failure, deplete your minerals, everything like that. But when it stops coming in from the gut, your tissues start releasing it, okay? Your tissues release it, and that is when you get an exacerbation of previous symptoms. So let me explain, right? The tissues follow some kind of a circadian rhythm, and it's different for each person, but it follows some kind of rhythm, and what we refer to this as is dumping. Now, dumping is not detoxification like we spoke about before. Dumping is essentially when your tissues dump what is oxalate, so dump the whole molecule of oxalate into the blood to prop back up the blood level when the blood level has gone down. This is the rationale for having a low oxalate diet. When someone goes on a low oxalate diet, because the low blood level, their tissues start to release it, and this is the way that we get rid of it from the body. This can take a very long time, and the reason for this is you think about it, if you were to dump all of the oxalate into the blood, you would probably die immediately. Okay, because if you've got a lot stored up, then you would overburden the kidneys, you would overburden the entire system. So what happens is you start dumping a bunch into the bloodstream, and this goes either out through the kidneys or the gut. It can also come out through various other areas. It can come out in the skin. So one of the things that you find, the body is a very, intelligent organism. It will employ any method that it can to get rid of stuff. And so the skin is a key detoxification organ, and so we use it to get rid of junk, essentially. And this is why sweating is so good. But essentially, it can be coming out the skin, and what you might see in this case is that you might see actual crystals or what look like little shards of glass coming out of the skin. It often causes rashes, but if you get like a microscope or something, you can see the crystals. I have many people who have this. Oftentimes it comes out of their jawline. That's very common. But then you also have it can come out of the mouth, can come out of all of the soft tissues. So you can actually have oxalate crystals kind of coming out of the gums and whatnot, and it can cause things like gum bleeding, gum irritation, gum inflammation. You can have it coming out of the eyes. So I get a lot of people who tell me that actually they have oxalate crystals which literally come out.
Oh,
you still there? Did you lose me?
I lost you. Yeah, you just said there's oxalates coming out of the eyes.
It can come out the eyes, and that really scares people. It can come out the eyes, and it looks like crystals of sharp glass, and it actually hurts their eyes, and they can get kind of like gummy eyes and kind of like red and swelling and pus coming out of their eyes. And actually, there's usually crystals as well. It comes out of the gut, so there is a mechanism by which we are dumping it into the gut, and then it's coming out via the feces, and then it's also coming out of the urinary tract. Now, for whatever reason, this follows cycles. Okay, so there are some individuals who have it once every 3 weeks. Some people have it maybe once every month or every 2 months. Some people have it a lot more frequently. And for some people, it comes at certain times of day. So, for instance, it might come in the evening time, or it might come in the afternoon time. And for whatever reason, it tends to follow different cycles based on individual variability. And what you would see then is you would see the joint pain. Like, for instance, if someone's on a high oxalate diet and they have frequent UTIs, they have joint pain, they have kind of muscle pain, they have fatigue, they have all of these issues, when they go on a low oxalate diet, they'll probably feel much better for a very short period of time. It can be a week, it can be a month, it can be 2 months. They can have something called a honeymoon period. But then what happens is they start to cycle and go through this dumping process, and all of their symptoms, which got better when they removed oxalate, actually get worse temporarily, and they think that they're relapsing, but they're not relapsing. This is the natural progression of what must happen. And so they think they've done something wrong, but actually it's important to coach them and educate them that this is the body's way to get rid of what they need to get rid of. Okay? So, as I said, all of these different kinds of exacerbations of symptoms can be diarrhea, can be constipation, can be kind of often burning urination. You will see cloudy urine. So actually crystals in the urine, microcrystals in the urine. You can see kind of blood in the urine sometimes. You can see headaches, acute dehydration. So what's happening is that when it's going into the blood, it's then binding with a bunch of minerals. Okay, so it's binding with your own potassium, with your own calcium, with your own kind of magnesium. So what this means is it's carrying them out through the urine or the feces, and therefore you are at a much higher requirement for certain minerals. You can end up with kind of tachycardia or weird cardiac type symptoms because you are acutely hypokalemic. Oftentimes you see potassium, so actually acute hypokalemia, very low potassium levels in the blood, which seems to be related to actually this dumping of oxalate into the blood, and it's binding with a lot of it and carrying it out. So it makes you acutely deficient during these times. Okay.
All right. So how long might that dumping process take approximately?
Well, I mean, I have not been in the field long enough to be able to determine when someone goes from being completely like oxalate overburdened to having it completely disappear. People generally tend to improve within 6 months to a year. Some people might improve a lot sooner on. Other people maybe not. Now, there are certain individuals who say that actually it can take from anywhere to 5 to 10 years to actually get rid of this stuff from the body. So this is something which is very long term, and this is kind of denotes the difference between ordinary plant toxins and oxalates. They're two different animals, right? And it's like the body will accumulate it, and it takes a long time to get rid of it. And all that you can do is remain on a lower oxalate diet and try to do some of the strategies, which I think we'll talk about. Use some of the strategies to try to mitigate the symptoms. But the chances are dumping will be very severe in the initial stages, and it will gradually improve as the body starts to get rid of this. Now, there is something very important to note is that I generally don't recommend most people, if they have been on a high oxalate diet, to reduce oxalate very quickly. That is a very dangerous thing to do, potentially, because what you end up with, and I've had several individuals, much like the other practitioners in this field I've seen, is people can end up, as I said, with low potassium, with kind of, it's called a metabolic crisis, so to speak. You can actually end up with people being admitted into A&E or the emergency room because they think they're going to drop down dead, because they think they're having a heart attack or some kind of thing, or they collapse, because when you reduce oxalate really quickly, it triggers the body to get rid of this stuff, but it can be overwhelming for the system. It can really overwhelm someone's system. It activates the immune system, so it can activate the lymph glands and cause like a kind of fever, cause symptoms which are very similar to what you would get if you were suffering from some kind of an acute infection. Can put you in bed for a couple of days, and in some people it might put them in hospital if they go too fast. So it's very important not to rapidly get rid of it. That said, some people do that and they're fine. So again, it's highly individual. There's this whole carnivore movement. Excellent. Some people respond really well. Some people get worse on that diet. And I think a lot of the times when they're getting worse, while sometimes it may not be that they can actually suit to the diet for whatever reason, oftentimes what I personally see is that actually they've gone too quickly and they end up dumping a bunch of oxalates.
Okay, so better go slowly on that. You wanted to touch on, like, can we actually measure that, the oxalates in our body?
Right. Okay. So there are a couple of medical tests that might be used if someone is suspected to have kidney or oxalate stones. One of those is going to be 24-hour urinary oxalate. So that is something, and I do have some clients who have come to me based purely on the fact that their doctor has randomly run a 24-hour oxalate and it's come back really high. Okay. That's something that you might see sometimes. There's also a test called the Great Plains Organic Acids test. Probably my favorite test on the market, not necessarily for oxalates, but for other nutrient deficiencies and things. But essentially, they do have 3 markers on there for oxalate, specifically for oxalates. One of those is measuring just pure oxalic acid in the urine. Another one is, there's 2 other markers which are related to whether the liver's making oxalate or not. But essentially, oftentimes, if you understand this process or this cyclical process of dumping, potentially there's a circadian variation on that and it differs between person to person. It's very difficult to say whether you're going to do that test and it's going to be at the right time that you're dumping oxalate in the urine, because it's not a consistent process. It's not something that occurs kind of the same amount every single day. It's not been established like a blood test. It's something which is kind of sporadic and cyclical. So sometimes you may go for a urine test, it may come back normal, but actually you've already dumped oxalates that day. You know, you're going to do it over the next week or something. And so oftentimes people are misdiagnosed. They're told that they don't have oxalate problems when they clearly do. And I find that actually the best kind of way to look at it, or the best way to proceed with that, I don't use tests as diagnostics. I go through history, I go through symptoms, I go through kind of comprehensive case assessment, and I make a decision based on a hypothesis. And if they respond well, they respond better to a low oxalate diet, then it's clear that actually oxalates are likely going to be involved here. So I tend not to use tests as diagnostic markers because they are inherently flawed.
Okay, got it. All right. I heard that there's certain compounds like vitamin C or glycine that actually could convert into oxalates. Is that true?
Right. So this is something which is kind of debated. I'm not really sure where I stand on it. I'll be honest. Right. So there is some animal literature which shows that in mice or rats who are B6 deficient or B1 deficient, what you can get is feeding the amino acids hydroxyproline and glycine can actually produce the oxalate precursor in the liver called glyoxal, which is theoretically going to be converted into oxalate. That being said, I don't know how much this is really applicable in real life. Mm-hmm. I think if someone was taking a bunch of glycine and they were very much B6 deficient, it's theoretically possible that they may actually end up with endogenous oxalate production. Now, there are some people who have these issues and they can't tolerate stuff like bone broth, or they can't tolerate glycine supplements. That being said, I'm not sure how much clinical relevance it really has, because I tend to get a lot of my people on collagen. I get them eating lots of muscle meat, and muscle meat is actually very high in glycine. Like, there's this idea that you need to eat collagen to get glycine, but I mean, it's bogus. There is so much glycine in muscle meat, you'd be amazed. So these people tend to respond very. Sorry,
isn't there much more methionine, and you gotta balance that with organs and bone broths and stuff like that?
Yeah, I mean, indeed, there's the ratio of, you have methionine, cysteine, and glycine ratio, and you could say that you're getting more methionine to glycine in a ratio. But if you actually look at the amount of glycine in muscle meat, there is still a lot. Like in comparison to methionine, when you're looking at the ratio, no, that's a different argument. But I mean, just simply from, just from kind of baseline, eating meat provides a bunch of glycine anyway. So any kind of meat that you eat, because collagen is essentially the most abundant protein in the whole entire body, and it makes up a lot of muscles. So actually, these people respond good to meat. So what I'm basically saying is that some glycine does not seem to be a problem for them. So I suspect it might be more related to the kind of glutamates and things that you might find in collagen powder, which are causing them an issue. But I don't know. I mean, it's theoretically possible. There is also this thing of vitamin C. Now, I will be honest, like, this is something which, again, is debated in the research literature. It seems to be clear in the animal research, but there's conflicting data. So there are some kind of individuals who will say you must not have any more than kind of 250 milligrams of vitamin C, because otherwise it will convert into oxalate. But then you also have some people, like, I mean, there's Doris Lowe, for instance, who is a major vitamin C proponent, especially talking about the effects of kind of 5G, the effects that we're going to be experiencing with 5G radiation, how we already have things like Wi-Fi, 4G, all of these things, how these at the cellular level are increasing our requirement for vitamin C due to the redox balance, okay? So I will be honest, I am not against vitamin C. I think it's highly individual, and I'm not dogmatic about it. I try not to take a stance. I just try to present the literature. So, for instance, if someone takes vitamin C, and I have several people, they take ascorbic acid and it makes them feel a lot worse, gives them joint pain, gives them any of this stuff, then I suspect that is converting to oxalate in their body. It's important to note that cadmium, if there's a lot of cadmium, this is going to be a key driver for catalyzing the oxidation of vitamin C into oxalate. One thing I didn't say is that if you look at the metabolic pathways, vitamin C can be auto-oxidized into oxalate fairly easily. One of the key drivers of that is cadmium. So I think if someone has like heavy metal toxicity, they have oxalate issues, and they try ascorbic acid, makes them feel worse, that's a problem. If it gives them kind of UTI symptoms, you see that in some people. Other people, I will be honest, I consult with many carnivores, right, who have full-blown scurvy. Right, and this is something that many people say, oh, you never see carnivores with scurvy. But actually, just this week, I've had 3 carnivores, okay? One who had terrible bleeding gums. The other one who had, like, chronic diarrhea. I gave them mega doses vitamin C. So in terms of, well, I say mega doses, 3 or 4 grams per day. His gums completely stopped bleeding, and his digestion improved. And the other one, her diarrhea, I mean, she'd been through, I don't want to name names, but she'd been through all the big clinic in carnivore, the International Clinic of Carnivore, the clinic that uses carnivore diets. She was told there was nothing that you could do to fix her diarrhea. She'd spent thousands on GI specialists. She came to me. I put her on 4 grams of vitamin C, and it cleared up in 3 days. And it's been that way for 2 months now, okay? So I think there's always nuance, right? And it's important not to kind of, like, people come to me and they say, oh, I shouldn't take vitamin C because I have an oxalate problem. And I say, well, actually, we need to look at you individually. You are an individual. You are not a test subject. You are not a clinical biochemistry textbook. We need to actually find out what you personally tolerate and what you need, because it differs between each individual.
Okay. Scurvy is like, there has been a study that shows that you need only 10 milligrams of vitamin C to prevent scurvy.
Sorry, say that again.
Sorry, the connection was gone. There's a study that says that you only need like 10 milligrams of vitamin C actually to prevent scurvy, and there's not a lot of vitamin C in muscle tissues from animals, but there is in the organs, especially in the liver. So you could kind of get along, but probably doesn't hurt to take a little bit more.
Well, like I don't want to detract away too much from this conversation, but this is a fascinating topic, really is. And I would say it seems that the majority of people on the carnivore diet really do fine without taking any vitamin C. They do fine eating some animal organs. This particular individual, I mean, he was eating probably more liver than anyone else that I would recommend. He was eating spleen, eating sweetbreads, all of this kind of stuff, which is said to have lots of vitamin C. But for whatever reason, it seems that his requirement was just higher. Yeah. So it was only when we supplemented vitamin C that things improved. Now, I'm not saying that actually there's other things going on which are increasing the requirement, which I suspect to be the case. Yeah. What I am saying is that it seems that from a more kind of functional medicine approach, I try not to paint everyone with the same brush and apply the same things to everyone. And so whilst I agree that the carnivore diet is likely beneficial and likely kind of sufficient in terms of vitamin C requirements for the majority of people, there are always outliers, and this is what kind of makes things confusing.
Yeah. Individuality is just a strong thing, and we just gotta listen to our bodies. Like we have this kind of mental dissociation. We believe in certain things, like we believe in a certain type of diet, whatever it is, like the paleo diet or the vegan diet or whatever, and then we just stick to that. Or even like the high oxalate foods. We believe in these because they're so healthy. We have seen studies or just blog posts or whatever that are copied from one to another, and we believe into these things, and we're getting worse, and we just take more of it. So we have already talked for quite a bit. What would be interesting for me is all these foods that we mentioned, Oh, by the way, I just wanted to touch on one little thing because it just popped up here on my screen in a way. You mentioned sorrel, which is in German Sauerampfer, and I just looked it up for some reason, and it shows like a huge list. There's something that's very similar to it, and it's a clover. Yeah. Okay. So it's a wild clover, and there's a huge list here on Wikipedia from this. And they're all called, like the Latin names are Oxalis something. Oxalis articulata. Yeah, like joints. Oxalis bowii, like bowel or something like this. Oxalis compressa, Oxalis whatever. This huge list. So this is known, and there's kind of a base to it. So is there something? All these lovely foods like almonds and quinoa and buckwheat and sweet potatoes and turmeric and cacao and cinnamon. Come on, is there anything we can do to mitigate to keep eating these and mitigate the damage that they do to our bodies?
Right. Okay. So, good question, I guess, because there's lots of ways that you can approach this. What I will say, I want to preface it with, if someone has an oxalate problem, if they have long-term accumulation, the best possible thing and probably the only possible way that they can effectively reverse the health condition is by gradually moving towards a low oxalate diet, to gradually reduce the oxalate content in the diet, because no matter what you do, you can somewhat mitigate the oxalates coming in. You can do various kind of supplements, things like that. But ultimately, you need to reduce the amount, because that is where most of the oxalate is going to be coming from. It's the diet. So you need to find replacements. You need to reduce your intake. Really, the best thing, the way that I try to get this through to the people I work with is that you need to stop seeing food as entertainment. Food is not entertainment. Food is fuel, right? If you're so hung up over the flavor, the texture, and whilst I know this can provide people pleasure, if this is the only thing that they eat food for, they need to really have a hard kind of sit down with themselves and be honest with themselves and say, right, okay, I need to choose. Do I prefer having temporary sensory pleasure on my taste buds, or do I want to get better? Because the two are mutually exclusive. The two, if that's the right word, sorry, I don't know if I said that in the right context. You have to choose one or the other. Okay, you cannot have both if this is your problem. And whilst you can find very kind of, tasty alternatives, if you have a chocolate addiction and this is driving your fibromyalgia, you need to stop eating chocolate, period. There's nothing you can do about that. You need to stop it. Otherwise, you can stay sick, and that's up to you. But, then why are you even listening to this health podcast, right? Because you want to improve, you want to change things. That being said, what you can do is you can try to mitigate some of the effects of oxalate. So for the average individual, right, for the average individual just wanting to reduce their absorption, you need to be eating foods which are high in calcium with the oxalate-containing food. So, for instance, if you are not intolerant to dairy, I think a lot of people are, but if someone is relatively healthy, they're okay with things like yogurt, they're okay with, other types of dairy, then actually having that with the food is going to greatly reduce the amount of oxalate that you're going to be absorbing. Okay, that's one thing. Another thing that you could be doing, I don't see this as an effective long-term solution, but taking a source of calcium with the meal, before the meal. Calcium or magnesium would do, but ideally calcium. Calcium is the tightest bond and it's the most insoluble form of oxalate. So if you can take calcium, being eggshells, or being some kind of calcium supplement such as calcium citrate, a teaspoon and a half of that before a meal. That is going to help you to protect you against absorbing excess oxalate. The only problem is that calcium, when you take it in a very high amount, what calcium also has the tendency to do is affect the absorption of other nutrients such as fat. Okay, calcium forms a soap in the gut with fat, and that can actually prevent you from absorbing it, which means that it can prevent you from absorbing the fat-soluble nutrients if it's taken in high enough doses. It can also influence the absorption of things like zinc and other nutrients which you really need. So actually, I don't think it's an effective long-term solution to be relying on a high dose of calcium before eating oxalate foods to justify your high oxalate diet. Right?
All right.
Okay?
That's something funny. I tried to educate my daughter. She's getting 11 in a few days about that. And she's such a clever girl. And so I said, like, hey, come on. Because I was always eating like the dark chocolate, like 85% or maybe even more. So, and then we talked about all that, the oxalates issues. And she kind of takes a piss sometimes, because she says like, yeah, daddy, and in 2 weeks, oxalates are going to be good, because she saw me going through so many stages, of dietary guidelines and everything. And I was preparing her before I was doing it for me, doing the almond milk and everything, and like in my Vitamix, like just because I won't accept like the bad one from the organic shop, right? So I take my organic almonds and blend them and soak them before and everything. So I have like this really, really living milk, right? So what she says is, then it's and I also explained that sugar is quite bad. It can lead to inflammation and everything, but if you burn it, it's actually not that bad. So if you consume some sugar and then you go on a long run or something like this, it's actually not that bad. And then she said like, oh, daddy, then actually having milk chocolate or something like this, like a lower, more sugary, less chocolate would actually be much better, right? At least if I would go on a run then.
No, it's true. It is true. If oxalates are the primary thing which are causing the problem and it's not dairy, milk chocolate is going to be a much better option, and it would be lower cacao. So like 30% milk chocolate would be way better than having 85% dark. Even better, white chocolate, right? White chocolate is the best. Now, I don't recommend that. And I can't even eat dairy, so I can't eat any of that stuff. But ultimately, yeah, paradoxically, you think, okay, this has got higher sugar content. This has got milk, which is potentially going to be, reactive for certain people.
Milk powder.
But ultimately, the people who have oxalate problems don't react to this stuff as much. And the milk powder is containing calcium, which is effectively going to prevent you from absorbing oxalates. So her logic is perfect. Her logic is perfect.
Yeah, I also thought that. It's like, you're just so clever, incredible, with 10 years,
Indeed.
you know. Yeah. Okay. So having milk chocolate or white chocolate. Okay. So you really don't recommend that, but. I had a guest recently, and I just mentioned oxalates, and he said like, "Oh, but this is only applies to people that don't know that you got to take dolomite with it."
Right, I think this is right. This way of looking at it is really problematic. Okay, I fundamentally disagree with this way of looking at things because, there are certain. Okay, we talked about calcium. There are certain things which do effectively bind with oxalate. One of those is charcoal. I think charcoal does. I think some of the other things like dolomite or bentonite or zeolite, basically these are clays, right? These are clays. I mean, they're not food. This stuff isn't food. Now, some people, certain cultures would eat it like with a meal. I mean, there's been cases of cultures who have been preparing certain root vegetables which are really toxic, but then eating a certain type of clay with it to bind to the toxin to allow them to digest the veg. Then the question is, if you don't have to eat the toxic veg because you have access to loads of other foods, why do you want to potentially put yourself in a situation where you are going to be inhibiting the absorption of other nutrients? Because that's what bentonite does. That's what dolomite does. That's what these clays and these things do. Is they're not specific for toxins, right? They can bind with other nutrients as well, right? And so it's the case with charcoal. Now, I don't have any issue with using binders. I use them with a lot of my clients in specific circumstances. But the question I really ask, and I think people need to be honest with themselves about, is if they need to eat clay with food, then is the food that they're eating really food? Like, is that food? Like, if they need to eat clay with it, I mean, what makes them think that that's a healthy thing to do? I mean, why can't you just eat a food that doesn't need to be eaten with clay? Why don't you just eat some meat or something? Now, I know that sounds kind of, maybe it's a bit like like strict. I mean, I don't really mess about with my clients. I'm honest. I say, you either do it or you don't do it. It's up to you. But, I'll tell you what works, and then we'll try meet in the middle. But I'm not going to pander to your, basically, if there's something that made you sick, you need to give it up. You need to stop doing it. And there's the old saying by Hippocrates, right? It's like, if you're not willing to give up what made you sick, then you're not going to get better. It's fairly simple. That being said, there are.
But still, could it be like? As a general idea to do that, I completely agree with you. But maybe at some points we want to kind of biohack ourselves into like, oh, today I really want to have that dark chocolate, or I'm invited there, and they have this. Could I just get something out of my backpack and just mitigate a little bit the damage?
Right, yeah. So that is the caveat, because actually if you're in a situation where, it's a social situation, it's a family situation, or you're in a restaurant, you can't get away from it. You can't do anything. And it's like, well, okay, on occasion, it's probably not even going to be that problematic to eat it if it's just occasionally. Yeah, but then if it's a thing like a business meeting or something, and you can't really decline the food and you have to do something about it. Yeah, there's charcoal. There's calcium. I'm not sure about dolomite. I guess dolomite probably binds oxalate. There's also certain enzymes which I don't have any clinical kind of experience with them, but I know that there are certain enzymes which you can take which help to degrade oxalate. So you take the enzymes, and they're like the enzymes which are produced by certain gut bugs, which are capable of degrading oxalate in the gut. So you can take that with the food. I can send you a link to that afterwards, because I'm not sure exactly. I don't know the name of it. I don't use it.
I'd love to.
Right. Okay. And then there's also what was I going to say? There's the enzymes, charcoal, clay.
What about lemon and citrates?
Right. Okay. So this is working on a different mechanism, right? So essentially, okay. So what you can do if you've got an established oxalate problem, there's a couple of things that you can be doing. So one of those, you want to work on multiple fronts, okay? You want to be looking at the mineral balance, the minerals that are affected by oxalate. You want to be looking at things which have been clinically shown to potentially dissolve or dissociate oxalate from calcium, so helping to, in a very simplified way of looking at it, dissolve oxalate crystals, and then help you get rid of that through the kidneys, through the gut, etc. So to do this, we need to look at several things. One of those is how your body's getting rid of it. So say you're dumping oxalate into the gut. When it goes into the gut, what you are looking to do is keep it in the gut. When you keep it in the gut, it goes into the toilet. The problem is, if you don't have enough calcium in the gut, or your bugs are not the optimal composition for oxalate degradation, then what happens is that when you dump it into the gut, you actually can reabsorb it, and you don't want to reabsorb it. So what you need to do is this is where something like calcium or calcium citrate can come in handy, because what you're doing is you're binding it. Much like if you take it before a meal, it's similar process. When you are dumping, so if you know that you dump every night, or you know that you dump at a certain time of day, you can take it kind of an hour beforehand to mitigate that when the oxalates get into the gut, you take the calcium, it binds them in there. Okay, it binds them in there. So that's one thing you can do. The citrate component is useful because citrate has been shown to, as I just said, it's been shown to kind of dissolve oxalate crystals and break them apart, help you get rid of them. So this is something which is recommended for things like kidney stones. Very useful in kidney stones. You can take various different minerals in terms of the ones which oxalate binds to. So calcium citrate, magnesium citrate, potassium citrate. You're going to be affecting mineral metabolism when your body is dumping this stuff, so you can replenish those. Okay, I usually recommend people to replenish those. Sally Norton does a lot of work on this kind of stuff. At the same time, though, we need to be looking at if someone has established kidney stones, then there is actually a herb which has been shown to be very beneficial, and this is called Chancropiedra. Chancropiedra. Chancropiedra can prevent the kind of the growth of new stones, while citrate is going to help you to potentially clear that. Okay. Now, whilst we're looking at the effects of oxalates in cells, if someone has a chronic oxalate problem, then we need to look at what it's doing to the energy metabolism. Generally, I find, as a kind of rule of thumb, there's 3 main B vitamins, and Susan Owens has done a lot of work into this. 3 main B vitamins which tend to be problematic or low in someone with established oxalate problems. That is vitamin B1, vitamin B6, and biotin. So we spoke about biotin being kind of you can produce a functional deficiency via excess oxalates, but B1 and B6 are also involved in endogenous production, and I suspect that high oxalate diet can actually deplete those through causing inflammation, through kind of upregulating energy metabolism, acting as a stressor, all of this kind of stuff. So I generally find that those B vitamins are key. I give most people those B vitamins. They usually find that it helps. Sometimes someone can think they've got an oxalate issue, which is actually mimicking a thiamine deficiency. So actually, by thiamine replacement, they tend to lose their oxalate issues, let's say, or they tend to improve greatly when a low oxalate diet didn't help. Now, in terms of, we've spoken about the minerals, right? It's important to note that the way that one of the mechanisms of getting oxalate into and outside of out of cells, particularly into and out of the kidney cells, is something called the I think it's this a certain type of transporter. I've forgotten exactly which one it is, but basically it's transporting oxalate. For every oxalate that goes one direction, you get sulfate and bicarbonate going the other direction. Okay, so what that means is if you've got high oxalate coming into the cells all of the time, what it's doing is it's actually causing you to waste sulfate. Okay, now you know your listeners, if they listen to Stephanie Seneff, then I don't know if she spoke about sulfate on your podcast. Did she say anything about sulfate?
Yeah, she did.
Okay, so cholesterol sulfate, the sulfation pathway, all of this stuff is kind of screwed by glyphosate. Essentially, sulfate is so important for everything that really happens in our body, and the oxalate causes you to waste sulfate. So it can cause a functional sulfate deficiency. What this means is that your joints, your tissues may have less of a kind of detoxification capacity for one, but also your structural integrity in terms of your connective tissue, your vascular system. All of these different kinds of things are going to be negatively impacted. So what I like to do is I like to replenish sulfate by providing a bioavailable source transdermally in the form of Epsom salts. This is essential. Okay, Epsom salts can generally help people because they provide magnesium. They also provide sulfate, which can be absorbed transdermally, and that has been shown to increase plasma sulfate. So Epsom salts baths are essential. What I like to do is if someone is releasing, say they've got joint or muscle pain, and they are releasing a bunch of oxalate from those tissues, because of the inflammation and the immune dysfunction that is going to be causing, I find that one of the most effective solutions to use to reduce pain and actually improve nerve function and things is topical DMSO. Okay, dimethyl sulfoxide. Now, you had a previous guest on about that, so your audience should know about the benefits of this. Dimethyl sulfoxide is essential, or I find it to be very helpful. It almost relieves the oxalate-induced pain within a couple of minutes. That can be applied topically on the joints, on the muscles. I don't know about taking it internally. I've never tried anyone to do that, but I have recommended it topically, and I find that people generally benefit a lot. You mentioned lemon juice. Lemon juice can be used. I typically don't recommend it that much. I tend to recommend the citrate supplements, but lemon juice can be very effective because it provides citric acid, it provides citrate. Someone can drink a lot of lemon juice, and it's going to ideally or theoretically going to help to clear out any oxalates, or kind of it's going to help to kind of affect the structure of the oxalate crystals. Okay. Again, it's all very theoretical because there's not much clinical research on it. There is some research on citrate and kidney stones, some research on the B vitamins in kidney stones. Ultimately, we are very much shooting in the dark, and we are relying very much on anecdotes, testimonials, and mechanistic data in terms of mechanisms for what might work. There is a wide variety or there's a very large community, a Trying Low Oxalates Facebook group that is over 25,000 people now. And there are people who are sharing their results. So a lot of what we know is that there are, tens of thousands of anecdotes all saying the same thing, all providing, documenting benefit from using these kinds of therapies. So we know that they work. It's just, unfortunately, if someone was to ask for a bunch of references, I could give them some, but it's not something that can be justified per se on a kind of foundational level through looking at scientific literature, because they're not doing it on it. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, it did. I was just looking. I just remembered that we had some community questions. I think we have answered most of them, but I just want to pick out one or two, and just kind of call it a day then. There's like Marcus says, like, okay, but we hybridized so many foods today. Probably could it be that the foods have been like more toxic, contain more oxalates before, and now they have actually a lot less?
That's a really good question. What you find is that generally with the hybridization, we hybridize them to make them more tasty. We hybridize them to make them look nice and more aesthetically pleasing, to have higher sugar content and generally less toxicity. But in terms of like the data that we have about oxalate content in the food, it's relatively recent data, a lot of it. So I don't think it's changed much. I'm not convinced that hybridization in any way. I mean, it may have done a couple of 100 years ago, like when we started hybridizing, I don't know, bananas or like carrots, for instance, or potatoes. I can't answer the question for certain, but I don't think that the oxalate content has changed from now, where we are now, to when they were last tested. I think it's probably similar.
Okay. So for some reason you have a little bit of a hum, but now it's gone away. Eckhart says like he just comments that he loves you and he has learned a lot from you from other podcasts. And Susan raises a good point. She says like, okay, there's lectins, there's phytic acid, there's oxalates, and other anti-nutrients. Like, what on earth can I still eat?
That's a question that I get a lot. I will be honest. I find that when we focus on the minutiae, on the minute details, everything looks hopeless, right? Everything looks hopeless. The vegan argument, for instance, against meat is based on mechanistic details. So, for instance, if you look at when you fry a steak, you produce things like heterocyclic amines. You produce carcinogenic chemicals, which in a Petri dish do cause cancer, right? They can do. But in real life, it doesn't quite work out like that. And I think it's the same for things like phytic acid. It's the same for things like lectins, and it's the same thing for things like oxalates. Please don't get me wrong. I am not saying that this is a problem for everyone. I don't think that everyone needs to completely get rid of oxalate at all. What I'm saying is that there are a certain subsection of people who do have this problem. And for these people, this is where it's really important. And so if they display the symptoms or display the kind of reactions that you get to foods which are high in oxalates, then actually they need to focus on this. And it might be a case for them that they don't necessarily need to remove some of the other plant toxins. You know, for some reason, people, you know, some people can tolerate a certain amount of lectins without it causing them problems. And I hate to be kind of controversial in saying that, but ultimately, you know, there's people who eat lectins for their whole entire life and live to 99, you know, like and the grandparents. Now, you could say that we're living in a different environment now, but ultimately the human body has some degree of resiliency, right? And so we can deal with a lot of this stuff. I don't think it's black and white that you need to be carnivore. I do think if someone
whole Brazil lives out of beans and rice. They eat that every day, even in the higher social classes.
Yeah. So if it was that bad, then I really, you know, the human race would be dead by now, right? So it's not as clear cut as that. And so it's important not to lose sight of the forest from the trees, right? If that's the right kind of phrasing.
Yeah.
Is rather than focusing on the tiny things, try to look at how it affects the human body in real life. Quite frankly, a lot of people don't seem to have that many issues with oxalates, and I'm not going to try and convince people that everyone should give up dark chocolate, because quite frankly, if you look at the research, the people who eat dark chocolate generally tend to have good outcomes, right? What I'm saying is that there are certain people, and I suspect it's people who are particularly fragile, let's say, particularly susceptible. They've got poor gut health. They've got chronic health conditions. They maybe came into this world with less of an ability to adapt to the stressors. There's also people who, for whatever reason, you know, have this as an issue, and there's loads of predisposing factors. You know, I've written about this and I've done other interviews and stuff. So if there's anything that I haven't spoken about, by all means, you know, anyone can get in contact with me or look at my articles or whatever. But essentially, there are certain things which make some people more predisposed to this issue than others. I would say that listening to your body is the most important thing that anyone can do. Yeah. If they can do testing, that's excellent. And if they can do experimentation, that's excellent. So for instance, if someone wants to go on a carnivore diet, really be honest with yourself. First of all, don't go try not to be dogmatic about it. And whilst it may make sense, certain diets may make sense from a theoretical perspective, listen to your body, because your body knows best. And there are certain people who just don't go well with certain diets for whatever reason. And so if you can try to identify what triggers you, what you can tolerate and what you feel best on, that's going to be best for you. And it may be that you can tolerate a little bit more oxalate in the diet. What I would say is that I don't think that high oxalate diets are going to be healthy for anyone, in terms of I don't think anyone should be having green smoothies. I don't think anyone should be having 9 cups of spinach per day. I don't think anyone should be having 4 whole bars of 99% dark chocolate, because then you are just asking for problems. Does that kind of answer the question? Yeah,
it does. And then 2 girls, they're asking kind of the same question. Is there any positive effect maybe from oxalates in our body? Because this girl, she says, like Liga, she says there's nothing in nature that doesn't make sense.
You see, this is something I've been racking my brain about for the past year or so, okay? Is there a beneficial... It's like, right, it's in the context of free radicals, right? Context of free radicals. They were originally thought to be the worst enemy for cells. So this idea that your cells make free radicals, and that actually by taking antioxidants, you are going to be able to fix everything and you're going to be able to massively improve longevity and health outcomes. Well, it turned out to be the opposite of the case. Actually, taking excess antioxidants had the opposite effect on longevity, because now we know that a small amount of stressor, a small amount of free radicals are actually really beneficial for the cells, and that you don't want to quell that with antioxidants. So the way that we view the body is actually seeing things that were previously thought of as bad are actually now acknowledged in small doses. They are beneficial, right? And I do kind of think that this idea of hormesis, a low-dose stressor, a low-dose toxin, is going to be good. Now, I'll give you one example for why this might be the case with oxalate, and I don't know if this really answers the question. This is the only thing that I can think of. Eating a very small amount of oxalate has been shown to increase the production or increase the population of oxalobacter in the gut. Okay. It's theoretically possible. I don't know if I believe it or not, but it's theoretically possible that by going on a zero oxalate diet, you could theoretically be killing off the bacteria in the gut, which allow you to degrade oxalate. Okay. And that by doing so, when you are dumping oxalate into the gut, if you don't have the bacteria present, then you may be absorbing it back, right? Is that kind of,
yeah,
it's very messy.
But also then you would not deplete yourself because you're dumping, actually, right?
What do you mean?
Yeah, if you stop consuming oxalates completely, then your body starts to dump, and then again you have oxalates in your gut, which feed the oxalobacter.
So there you go. The theory that I just came up with falls apart, right? So I have no idea. I honestly, there was one individual, Jack Cruz, who was saying that it's like a reservoir for vitamin C, that you can interconvert the two. I've seen no such evidence. So I've seen no evidence that you can take oxalate and oxidize it back to, or reduce it back to vitamin C. So I'm not convinced that would be the case. However, that is, if there was something to back that up, that would make sense. It would make sense why we produce oxalate, and it may actually be a remnant of how previous kind of, in our evolutionary history or whatever, maybe it was a reservoir for vitamin C. I don't know. But yeah, I can't, the way that I see it, it's a metabolic byproduct of metabolism. We can get rid of it fairly easily, but it can cause problems when you have too much of it. And I would love to know the answer to that question. I'm really sorry I can't answer that.
Yeah, you have answered a lot, man. You can't answer everything. And there's so many things we don't know. And who knows about the vitamin C? The body is just such a miracle thing, and it's able to transform everything into anything, really. I mean, otherwise we would be dead already, with the diets we have, with the lifestyle we have, and we're still we're not thriving, but we're still there. And some of us are doing okay, and this is just because of all these capabilities of the body to mitigate a lot of things, Yeah. Is there anything you want to add that you think we have not touched on and that would really be missing?
We've touched on quite a lot, haven't we? We've touched on quite a lot. Nothing that comes immediately to mind. I would say, again, kind of like what we were just speaking about, try not to be dogmatic and take the information that I'm saying, that I've said today. It's based on some research. It's based on some clinical experience. It's based on a lot of anecdotes. I'm not saying that this is the one size fits all. This doesn't apply to everyone. The toxicity does, but essentially, the necessity to go really low oxalate in the diet, I don't think it applies to everyone. So please don't listen to this and get scared and become stressed about what you can and can't eat. It's just about educating you and making you aware so that you're better empowered to make decisions to improve your health. I'm not scaremongering. Like, I don't want that to be the message that I'm telling people they can't eat this because it's evil. I'm not, I don't want people to get that impression. I just want people to be better informed so that they can try to be as healthy as they can, right?
Yeah, and it's important to know like the top 10 foods or something like that, and then just be aware that just not overdo it.
Yeah,
like you and me did, right?
Yeah, and if someone does have an established issue, don't immediately drop them, all of a sudden. It's like, right, go onto the resources, look at the Trying Low Oxalates group. So that has like 10 educational modules to like lay out exactly what to expect, what happens, what you can do about it, or seek out a practitioner who knows what they can, like how to proceed with this. Unfortunately, there's not many of us, but, just do what you can in that regard. If you're having issues, then seek out some help, join a group, get some advice. It's not advised to do it alone necessarily if it's causing you a lot of problems, because it's very easy to go too low too fast, and it can make you feel really sick. And there's ways that you can mitigate those issues. We've spoken about some basic things today, but again, it is highly individual. So the groups are there. Trying Low Oxalates, that's excellent. There's a spreadsheet available on there, and there's, as I said, the educational modules, and I think that actually that's a fantastic resource for people, and it's completely free.
Okay, great. Elliot, that was really a pleasure for me. Where can people find you?
Right, so my website is www.eonutrition.co.uk. That's got some little bit of information about myself and the kind of thing that I do. I have a Facebook page, which I don't really update that often, but I post a couple of articles here and there. That's just Facebook EO Nutrition. I am starting to do a lot more on YouTube now, so I've still got a relatively small subscriber base. I think it's about 6,000, but I've got 25 or so videos on there. I like to make educational videos, kind of doing these interviews, but also doing kind of PowerPoint lectures and presentations. I talk about lots of different things there. I've got some videos about oxalates with some of the details and diagrams. I also do a lot of work on some of the B vitamins, primarily vitamin B1. I think that that's a really important one in our modern world, and yeah, people can find a lot of my stuff there. Other than that, yeah, I think that's everything really.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And to see you as a medicine practitioner, like locally, where are you based?
Yeah, so I'm based in the UK. Most of my clients, just to be clear, I'm not a medical doctor, so I'm not conventionally practitioner of medicine. I practice functional medicine, which is more nutritional based. But essentially, I actually work with clients from all around the world, right? So what I found is that most of the people that I work with are generally throughout Europe. Some of them in South America, some of them North America, Canada. I work via Skype. So if people want a consultation, they can get in contact with me. I have some forms that need to be filled out. And then essentially what we do is we sit like you and me are sat here today. Feels like you're in the same room as them. And we go through kind of the health history and everything. And that's how I work with people. Mm-hmm. So I find it to be very effective. And yeah, it's
health coaching, essentially.
Yeah, kind of that kind of thing. Yeah.
Okay, great. Elliot, that was really a pleasure, and I think we have really done something today, and now I got the work to kind of translate 3 hours of an interview into like, I don't know how I'm going to do this. It's going to take the whole day. Okay, yeah, thank you very much for being on the show, and wish you a splendid day.
Yeah, it was a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me on, and keep up the great work that you're doing. I've seen that you've interviewed some giants in the field like Alexander Wunsch, if I'm correct. I think he's fantastic. Stephanie Senna, all of these different big names. Keep on doing what you're doing because, it's really great and it helps a lot of people. So thanks.
Yeah, thank you. You too. Bye.
Bye.
Wow. I gotta run to the toilet now. You're sitting. Wow, sitting must be bad. I'm standing at least.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I was sitting and my legs are just like, oh.
Yeah, I can imagine. All right. Yeah.
So that went on a bit longer than expected. Sorry about that.
Yeah. No, it's good. That's what I want to do. I want to always create like the ultimate resource. The last part, I might split it, maybe not. I don't know, because it's like twice the size as the other ones. So you can have 4 episodes. No, it's really good. I want people like having no questions after listening to one of my episodes, and we definitely achieved that. Good. Yeah, well, that was great. You know, I love to talk about it, and you know, there's so much to talk about. There's so many things. I think there's things that we missed, but I can't even like think about them because my head's just a bit skewy after that. You know, talking for so long. But yeah, no, thanks for having me on. It was great. How can I kind of advertise this to my community? I'll send you a link. It's probably coming out 20th of January.
Okay.
And I start with the German one, and then yours coming just after that. Oh, that's a horror now. How I'm going to do that? I promised it in the interview, so I can't get it. Cannot not do it. Yeah, I didn't translate my interview with Paul Saladino because I'm actually on a carnivore diet, and people want to know so much about it, you know.
Right. Yeah.
And because this is a lot of controversy, and people in Germany are not ready for that, you know.
Yeah,
internationally it's something else, you know. But
I do work with a couple of people from Germany on carnivore, so there's a couple of them. There's some of them, but I mean, how big's your kind of subscriber base? How big's your channel?
That's hard to say. I have like 3,000 downloads per day.
Wow,
on the podcast, and then there's a couple of thousands on YouTube, and then there's Spotify and everything. So it's kind of all over the place.
Wow, 3,000 a day.
No, that's nothing if you compare it to like Paul probably has like 50,000 now, and he's just started a year after me.
Oh, right, okay. Oh, on his fundamental health podcast.
Yeah, I mean, Germany or the German-speaking countries, 3 countries, it's kind of big and whatever, but you can't compare it to English, you know. Once you do something in English, okay, you have a lot more competition, but at the same time, if you kind of stand out like Paul does, you know, I mean, he's really getting pushed. He has been on all the shows, and he's incredible right now. He's challenging everybody. He has done some episodes with Chris Masterjohn, and he's going after like everybody. Like
I know he is. He burst onto the scene. He just burst. Thing is, he's very fluent verbally, right? He can his articulation is so good. And he's got a lot of experience, and clearly he's such an intelligent guy, and he's a very nice guy as well, clearly, and seems very genuine. I remember he was on Sean Baker's podcast, and then he was on like 1 or 2 others. And then from that point onward, like he was on like every single podcast. I'm surprised he hasn't been on Joe Rogan. You know, I think Joe Rogan will get him on soon enough. Oh yeah, sure about that. He hasn't been. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, well, we did the Joe Rogan format today. It's 3-hour podcast. Okay, Elliot, I got to run to the toilet now. Yeah, me too, mate. Me too. Pleasure. Thank you. I sent you the link. I just tell you when it's coming out, and then it would be nice if you could share it also. Yeah, that'd be great. Thanks very much. Nice to speak to you. Yeah. Keep up the good work, eh? Yeah, you too. Bye. Speak to you. Bye-bye. Bye-bye. You are certainly aware of the fact that our sleep is probably the most important factor when it comes to health and regeneration. A good sleep is key for energy production, detoxification, brain health, and a lot more. The Oura Ring is probably the world's best sleep tracker. It's a tiny little ring that can track your deep sleep, your REM sleep, and even sophisticated parameters like night HRV and body temperature. I was able to identify a couple of sleep-related problems for myself and solve them with the help of the Oura Ring. The ring comes with a built-in airplane mode and does not emit any visible light during the night like some popular wristbands or smartwatches do. I simply love my Oura Ring. And the best part is, listeners of the Virus 360 podcast now get a whopping $50 off. The only thing you got to do is follow the link in the description of the podcast, and the discount will be applied in the final checkout step. Sleep well.